Well, what a journey it's been. So the first time we stood a candidate in an election was in the 1993 federal election. We stood Rebecca Wigney as a candidate in the seat of Latrobe. It was the only seat we stood in Victoria. We just hoped we'd get our deposit back, which in the end we did. And I stood there outside the Kilsyth Primary School handing out how to vote cards. And at one point, one gentleman came up and snatched the how to vote card off me and looked at it and said, "What is this?" And I said, "Well, we're the Greens and we believe in the environment, peace and social justice and grassroots democracy." And he just looked at me in disbelief and said, "You are wasting your time." And having just heard Adam, what an answer that is to the project of bringing a better politics to Australia and to Victoria. For too long, big money politics has disenfranchised the people of Melbourne. We've been taken for granted, and we face governments that are unaccountable and unresponsive. We've got ministers who sell their time for political donations. We've got public-private partnerships building white elephants like the desal plant, channel deepening, the north-south pipeline, that are just unaccountable. We can't find out the figures behind them. We've got sham public consultations like we saw with the Windsor, keeping the community locked out of any genuine say in the city that we live in. Now, we're facing a climate emergency here in Victoria, and yet you wouldn't know it from the actions of the government. Here in Victoria, Hazelwood is Australia's dirtiest power station. It was supposed to close down in 2005, but the government extended its life to 2031. And as we sit here now, the EPA is considering approving yet another coal-fired power station for Victoria. We need to retool the Victorian economy for the 21st century, unlocking the jobs and the economic potential of our renewable industries. So Hazelwood should close down within the life of the next Parliament. And then we should get on with closing down the other power stations. And we'd like to have measures for Victoria to conserve and recycle water. But instead we're given over-engineered projects that are shopped by financiers and which trash our environment. Now, just 4 years ago at the last state election, the single biggest issue was the desalination plant. And Labor went to that election promising not to have the desalination plant. Premier Steve Bracks famously described the desalination plant as a hoax. And here we are with a much bigger hoax. Here we are with a desalination plant that on the latest figures has a capital cost of $18 billion. And not only did the community never get a chance to vote on that desalination plant, but we can't find out anything about it in detail because, of course, under freedom of information and with our parliamentary committees, this is all said to be commercial in confidence, so you can't know about it, and where there is a loss of sovereignty for the community. Police, of course, have entered into memorandums of understandings with the developers of the power plant, of the desalination plant, to hand over private information from people who oppose it, so that there is a chilling of free speech and a corrupting of our very democracy. We continue to prop up native forest logging in Victoria when we should have moved to plantations years ago. We have a vast plantation resource. We know that our logging of native forests is uneconomic, it's effectively subsidised. We know that it in fact increases fire risk, it costs an enormous amount of water, and of course we lose so much biodiversity when we log. And it's left to community groups to take expensive court actions like we saw with the Brown Mountain case to demonstrate in court that the government is failing to protect our forests as it logs them and as the law requires. I think we've reached the point where from now on, if you're going to log a forest, you have to first plant the trees on your own land and grow them there before you can cut them down. Now today we learned that that Vic Roads have a very secret but detailed and utterly loopy plan for wall-to-wall freeways right across Melbourne in 2040. It's 1950s thinking for the 21st century. Now just who is running this state? Is it Vic Roads or is it our elected representatives? For want of any policy of their own, the government has championed every single one of these Vic Roads projects, right down to the Peninsula Freeway, where we saw people arrested last week who were opposing it by a massive police presence. And of course, here in the Melbourne electorate, we've got Westlink, which the government says is its #1 priority. The whole of Westlink, which will cost billions of dollars, runs right beside a completely underutilised railway line, and it will vomit 5,000 cars an hour into the Docklands area, causing utter gridlock in Kensington, West Melbourne, North Melbourne and Docklands. And that's without going into pollution, carbon, the whole thing. It is a completely failed idea, and yet to achieve this project, the government's ridden roughshod over people's rights, not just with arresting people as we saw at Peninsula Link last week, but also with acts of parliament like the Major Transport Projects Infrastructure Act, which has at a stroke of the pen trash protections like the Environment Act, the Environment Protection Authority Act, the National Parks Act, the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act, the Heritage Act, and many other acts, the Water Act. They're all gone if you want to build a freeway now. These are protections that took generations to win. As we reach peak fuel and climate change, not only do these freeway projects cost us billions of dollars, they are costing us the earth. And the Greens are committed to hold the government to account, and indeed only the Greens, Colleen, Sue and Greg, have been holding them to account over the life of the last Parliament. Now we've got a map for the freeways that will be in Melbourne in 2040, but you can't actually now get a map of the public transport system in Melbourne as it is today in Melbourne. It's not available. It's not produced. Public transport's the poor cousin of freeways. In 1929, when the population of Melbourne was less than a quarter of what it is now, between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. at Newmarket Station within the seat of Melbourne, there were 18 trains going into the city. Today, there are 12 if they all run, and if you can get on them. Privatisation of rail and trams is an experiment which has manifestly failed. We need public transport in public hands for the public good. Now, Zurich administers its public transport system, which of course moves more people than Melbourne's, with a staff of 36. And here in Melbourne we have for example, the Transport Ticketing Authority, which has only one job, and that is to hire somebody else to run a ticketing system. The Transport Ticketing Authority has 104 staff, and they chose Mikey. Now, we're sick and tired of excuses like unexpected hot weather in Melbourne, like Connex was no good but Metro will be better, or the system is at capacity. I mean, as the 1929 timetable shows, it just isn't. We can fix public transport using overseas models, and the Greens are committed to doing that. Melbourne's founders gave us an emerald necklace of parks around the city. Wonderful parkland, but constantly being eaten away. And just last year, for an example, the Melbourne City Council had Yarra Park taken away from it and given to the MCG Trust for the single purpose of allowing the MCG to continue the process of allowing car parking on that heritage listed park for more than half the days of the year. That is a preposterous way to treat a heritage park. Marvellous Melbourne is full of heritage listed buildings, and we should cherish that heritage. But instead we have examples like the Windsor, which has a 25 metre height limit on it, being allowed to go up to 91 metres because profit is more important than heritage. We have planning laws that are too susceptible to the influence of money and influence and unresponsive to the community, and the laws need a radical overhaul, and the Greens are committed to dealing with those problems throughout the planning system. Now let's have representatives who celebrate creativity in our community and help everyone, not just big names, but big names too if need be, but everyone contribute with art and music. The live music licensing problems are still there. They have not been resolved, despite the community getting very active earlier this year, and the Greens are committed to dealing with that problem. And wasn't it great? And I think we'll hear from them again, having the Ben Harrison trio here tonight, providing some... Now, our greatest protection as a community comes from valuing human rights. And that's a wide range, whether it's housing rights, gay marriage, the right not to be randomly searched. But our community only thrives when human rights, the dignity of each person, is respected. Now, if ever we needed to vote Greens, it's now. The seat of Melbourne is very close. On the figures from the 2006 election, if just 600 Labor voters had switched their votes to Green, we would have won the seat. And we've shown already what we can do with grassroots democracy by making history and getting Adam elected just 7 weeks ago. Now we need a voice, and voices in the state lower house. We will be outspent by a factor of 10 to 1 or more. In the budget for the state seat of Melbourne, the Greens do not have enough money to send an addressed letter to every elector. We don't have enough money to do that once. But we do have people power. Whether it's door knocking, letterboxing, running stalls, running events, we have the people on the ground who are committed to making a difference, and we can carry our voice into Spring Street in that way. We've made history federally. Now let's do it in the Victorian Parliament. This time let's vote Green for a creative, compassionate Melbourne, caring for the environment and valuing our community.